I don't count it as an accomplishment. So now to move on to the actual topic I'm supposed to be talking about, leading from the board. Allison described it correctly. I was recruited to the HP board in the late, this was around 1998. At the time, the company had a very large board of directors. I think there were 16 or 17, including quite a few family members of the Hewlett and Packard scions. And the then chairman and CEO of HP, Lou Platt, some of you may know of him, made it. He was kind of an enlightened guy in a lot of ways, and he became convinced that the board was an impediment to the company moving forward in ways that he knew it had to be successful. At the time, the company had a business which is now known as Agilent, which was kind of the core stuff that happened in the garage, basically. Was the instruments, oscilloscopes, medical equipment, the sort of engineering-intensive products that Hewlett-Packard made its initial successes with. But then it had grown this enormous personal computer business, a huge printer business, which was then supplying, through the sale of ink, virtually all the profits of the company, and a seriously lagging services business, which was trying to compete with organizations like IBM and EDS, and having a very hard time being seen in the marketplace as having right offerings. So Lou, he had a plan. His plan was to completely remake the board, to see if he could persuade some of the family members to step down, and to create a little more diversity on the board from the standpoint of both gender and background. So I was the first, except for one of the daughters of David Packard, the first woman and the first person with a financial services industry background to come onto that board. And within a very short period of time, relatively, I'd say in the first year or so, the Agilent spinoff was proposed. I don't know if any of you were born then, because I was so young, but it was a very traumatic experience for Hewlett-Packard. Does anybody here ever work for HP, by the way? Because I know that sometimes people go right from there to here, but anyway, or here to there. Agilent, with the spinoff of the core historical business that Dave and Bill built, was a very traumatic event for the family and for the company. And for the board members who were family, it was a tragedy in their view of unheard of dimensions. So that really did break the board up, both because when the new company was spun off, it took board members with it, because some family members resigned in protest. It ended up that the ongoing company board of HP was a much smaller board. I think we got down to 11. And some new members were recruited as well to fill some empty spots that had been created through the spin-off, or the trauma. So my experience, my first experience in a boardroom was, boy, this is more like a psych ward, it's got a lot of drama and family conflicts and jealousies and people with grievances from a lot longer ago than I knew any of them, and this doesn't really feel like a sort of business-like, forward-looking board. It really feels like a, place that needs not a governance expert, but a psychologist to come in. But it was interesting. I mean, it was fascinating, and it was, I couldn't wait to show up and sort of watch the next episode. So it was interesting and fun, and I tried to make a contribution. Initially, from the standpoint of my expertise in finance, at least investing, so the roles I played on the board tended to be on investment committee, finance committee, audit committee. But as I got to know the people on the board and understand the issues that were still bedeviling that board, I saw that there were a lot of bridges that needed to be built between people. And without sort of consciously seeing myself as the person to do that, I just wanted everybody to get along. I mean, there's a Rodney King inside me that just wants everybody to get along and be happy and not fight each other. So I started trying to, and I thought I understood the points of view of most of the people on that board that were being overlooked by other people on the board. So I found myself in the role of explaining members of the board to one another, which can be a sort of a dangerous thing to do, but it actually worked out initially pretty well. I thought that there was a lessening of the tensions. There were more sort of let's forget the past and move forward and think about the company, not each other. That point of view seemed to be taking a bit more hold. Then we had another sort of crisis in the boardroom occurred around the merger with, it was actually an acquisition that was dressed up as a merger with Compaq. And some of you may be old enough to remember that the Compaq acquisition by HP was hugely controversial. Family members who had left the board were up in arms about the idea that the company would grow its low-margin PC business. And it was Walter Hewlett who waged a proxy battle against the company to prevent the merger, and was very nearly successful. I think the final vote was like a 1% margin, which is unheard of in corporate America. When you propose a merger, it's 90% plus, and you get the vote. And of course, it was a very highly visible and incredibly demanding position for the CEO at the time, Carla Fiorina, to be put in, and it was her fingerprints were all over. I mean, this was her deal. She may not have. I think she was approached by the guy who was running Compaq to consider this acquisition. She saw the need for consolidation in the technology industry. And as controversial as that deal was, I don't think there's any question in 2011 that consolidation was inevitable, it was needed, and even, I think it's now well accepted, if not shouted from the rooftops, it was actually a successful deal. It was a little late in delivering the value that was promised to shareholders. I think it was about a year behind the projections. But in spite of the great public hue and cry, the deal was a good deal for HP shareholders. It was certainly a good deal for Compaq shareholders. But it created another problem on the board. And that was this classic, you came from Compaq and I came from HP. I mean, this is really schoolyard stuff. action because they had failed in requiring an acquisition to save the company from itself. And that's not a good mindset for a board to be working with. The factionalism, sense of, where some people are better than others because they oversaw the acquiring company as opposed to the acquired company. So I went back into action trying to, and on top of that, we also had come to the end of the line with our CEO, who, but obviously is a woman, and there's a lot to be said about, but I'm not going to talk about that. But we did have a crisis in the boardroom over the suitability of the CEO to continue in that role in the new larger company. Suffice to say, this was a extraordinarily emotional, difficult time for the board, with a couple of members who felt that CEO Carly Fiorina was being set up to fail by other board members, and the other board members feeling that those people were in her pocket and had no objective, couldn't view her objectively. So I kind of went back to the drawing board. I actually went to the lengths of writing down what I was hearing from everybody and circulating it, unattributed to everybody else, so that they could, because I thought if they could just see their words on paper, see how they read and how they sound, they're going to have trouble putting their hand in there and saying, yeah, that's what I think. Because it was outrageous in my view that they weren't thinking about, moving on and keeping the company on a good track to grow for the future. They're just thinking about their own issues with each other, in my opinion. So there came a time when I was the only person on that board who could carry on a conversation with every other member of the board. So in a, talk about a battlefield promotion, after we finally agreed that we needed a new CEO, I was asked to serve as the non-executive chairman. It was not something I expected. It wasn't something I sought. And it was not well thought through from the standpoint of what the other board members really expected or understood the role to mean. The company had virtually never had a non-executive chairman. So we, had to start from scratch and just sort of educating people, getting educated myself. What is the role? There are only 9% of U.S. S&P 500 companies that have a non-executive chairman. It is the common governance structure outside the U.S., but it was a very soft ground in terms of getting people to understand what the role was. You're not the decision maker. Nobody works for you. I didn't have an office. I didn't have a secretary. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a budget. But somehow people think you're in charge, which came back on. So this board was, I think there were other members, male members, who could have, if they wished, taken the role and been the mediator. They chose not to, so it was kind of like a job nobody else wanted to do. And of course, we just aim to please, right, Allison? So we step into these situations and do the best we can. The situation ended up being rather